Yeah, I have a question. It's obvious that you live what you're saying. It's more than just an intellectual exercise when you talk about communism. But I'm wondering if that capitalism versus communism, if that dichotomy is not really addressing the issues of race. And I notice a lot of black students in the room. Couldn't it be that black people might not be empowered under either system? So wouldn't a new paradigm be useful, and some more critical thought be useful in coming up with a new economic theory for the future? And in the early writings, wasn't Karl Marx and Hegel viewing African history as inferior? So wouldn't we need to improve on some of those historical antecedents when we talk about a new economic theory for the future?
Should I take it?
Either way.
I won't address the last question, but what I will say is this, is that in order to create a society without racism, in order to create a society where basically we look back on the history of racism and say, how were they distinguishing people? What was the basis of it? And that basis would seem as absurd to future people as, you know, I don't know, crazy theories do to us now. In order to create that, we have to fight racism here and now. Now, what I see is no communist movement is worthy of anybody's attention unless it proves its worth in how it organizes and fights now for the working class and unites the working class. And to me, the fight against racism, and not just to me, to our party, to Progressive Labor Party, the fight against racism is at the center of what it is to be a communist and to build a communist movement. If the fight against racism is at the very center of what we're doing from the very beginning, then it will be at the very center of the new society that we build to destroy all the remnants of capitalist racism and to create a society, which I described very briefly at the beginning, where each individual is cherished and each individual is encouraged to develop her or his abilities and then to contribute those abilities back to the entire working class, to the entire human race.
Can I say a word about that? Yeah. For my own part, I'm not optimistic about getting rid of racism. I don't think capitalism is going to do that, and I don't think communism is going to do that. Every society that I'm familiar with, from reading history, has had racism. People love to hate. So I think you have to look to these two systems for other virtues if they have them. That's not something that we're going to get out of them. That's my own 2 cents on that.
Okay, looking at the Koreas, both North and South, North is seen as being worse off due to bad health care and the lack of it in their country. North is being seen as a true communist country, being the most independent country in the world. As you brought up a point in it, in being good to use local products as opposed to the imported, such as Chinese steel in international markets. Do you believe that the North would be able to become the ideal communist country if they're able to find the median and destroying the separation of the classes by so-called spreading the wealth? Or basically what I'm trying to ask is, can the perfect communist country be created with also having a high standard of living as compared to the US, Canada, and Western Europe?
That's a question which would allow me to address something Ben said, and I think it may be helpful. What Ben said is that I'm sorry.
Microphone.
Oh, the microphone. What Ben said is that we should measure capitalism by, and then he drew this line going up, right? But the line, I take it, is a line of production of things, right?
Partly, yeah.
Okay.
Also democracy and various other things.
But
yeah.
Here's what I would suggest, that and production of things works under capitalism. I'm going to broach a topic which we haven't broached yet. Production of things works under capitalism because it's done efficiently in a very short-term way. What that's led to, I think, may be, and here I'm going to speculate a little bit, may be maybe the greatest crisis that humanity's ever faced. That is, if and you can see in the elections that none of the capitalist politicians want to address this. If the United States continues, and the rest of the capitalist world, continues to consume fossil fuels at a rate which continues to accelerate global warming, we're in danger of destroying the world's agricultural base and the ability to produce food, because much of the agricultural production of Asia and of California and much of the rest of the world is based on snow melt and glaciers. If the climate reaches a point where it destroys the snow melt and the glaciers, you destroy much of the irrigation agriculture, and you create much more violent climate with droughts and floods throughout the entire world. That would threaten the ability of everyone on Earth to eat. I think that this, if it means continued production and consumption of fuel to produce cheaply and efficiently, that could lead to a disaster for humanity. And I think part of the reason capitalism can't address that is it's very short-sighted and it's competitive. I don't know, does that address what you were asking?
Can I also answer that, or is that,
Yeah,
was
no,
that
you should
the
answer.
yeah? My answer to your question is no. Communism can't generate the sort of standard of living that we have, and I think there's a simple reason for that. As you may have noticed from how Paul has talked, communists imagine, they have as their sort of goal person to talk to a very idealistic person, a very high-minded person. I think it's one of the virtues of capitalism that it doesn't assume anything about motivations from the people working in the free market. That is, of course, it's better for people to be, to care about other people, but as we all know, there's sort of greed in the souls of every person. We're all a little bit greedy, right? And what the amazing thing about the free market is that it can take any motivation, either a altruistic, beneficent motive, or just plain old greed, and it converts both into increased standard of living. The way it converts greed is that the company gets its money by having more sales, right? So they're going to make a cheaper kind of toilet paper that's a little bit better than the rival, right? So if you want to make as much money as possible, you'll make a better, cheaper product. Of course, maybe the owner of the toilet company has altruistic motives. He's only interested in the good of mankind. But either way, capitalism is going to via the free market is going to cause things like toilet paper and ketchup, all the things that we actually use, to get cheaper and better for everybody. There is no such mechanism in communism. They have a command economy. There isn't, if the people at the top of the communist system are high-minded people, it might go well. But most people have at best mixed motives. And so I think that's the difference between, that's why capitalism has generally produced an upwards and upwards standard of living. It's because no matter what the motives of the parties in the negotiation, we're all in a negotiation with these companies, right? We all decide what brand of toilet paper to buy, right? We make choices there. Those choices, in effect, count as a vote for that company, and that's why they go one way rather than another. Sorry, that was a long-winded. Yeah.
Yes, good evening. I think you may have kind of answered a little bit, but I was going to say for both of you gentlemen, if when capitalism promotes, whatever it does, but there's like advancement, like they promote and they challenge each other, which leads to like medical and technological advancements. Would that be possible in a communist society, or what do you think?
So I gave my answer to that question, which is no, because communism relies too much on the goodwill of the people in play. And goodwill, while a wonderful thing, is not always in great supply. And so what you need is an economic system that will improve the lives of people, whether or not the parties involved have altruistic motives or egoistic motives. But let Paul answer the question.
Alex, I don't want to lose sight of, because I want to address what Ben said, and then I want to address what you said. First, I have to respond to this thing about that for capitalism, the motives are irrelevant. What that leaves aside is that every society encourages some motivational systems as opposed to others. And I think capitalism debases us motivationally. That is, it appeals often to the very worst in us. I'll mention some research, which I mentioned to Ben when we met a month or so ago, about motivation in psychology. It turns out that when you motivate people extrinsically, and being paid for labor is extrinsic motivation, that when you motivate people extrinsically, the research is that you undermine intrinsic motivation. You undermine doing work for the joy of the work itself. And so capitalism tends to undermine us in terms of the kinds of motivations it encourages and in terms of the joy of our lives. Now, that's a response to what Ben said. Alex, can you ask again so I can respond to what you asked? And I apologize for losing it.
I'm never very clear, but like I know like capitalism like promotes competition, like
right.
in communism.
Oh, what would be the motive?
Yeah, like what would be the motive for like medical and technological advancement?
Right. I would hold up to you, I think, although people interpret the advances in science in different ways, but I would hold up to you science or philosophy or any other enterprise which is not competitive, where the enterprise advances by people giving and taking criticism. And that moves science forward. And I think that's a very communist way to move forward. So I would hold up the advancement of pure science as an example of a communist system of progress. And I think that very same kind of motivation where, for the most part, scientists and a lot of people like that do their work for the pure joy of doing that work, that ability to mobilize our joy in doing work could motivate, the best kind of production for real human needs.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have some further questions here. For the audience, once again, thank you for coming out. For those of you who engage in classes, there will be sign-up sheets after the debate located outside.
Earlier, you gave an example of how things are improving capitalism, of people having access to things like ketchup and central air, things that were previously available to only like the wealthiest at the time, now are available to many of us. But though like many people have access to these goods and services, it seems that as like a trade-off, people are kind of encouraged more to take on more debts, where people are like new college students are barraged with credit card offers, with issues with the housing market, how people were given loans for houses which they couldn't afford, and also with our government, where recently they had to vote on like raising the debt ceiling, and we currently sell our debt to China to try to keep our economy going. Like, with that being said, can it really be said that capitalism is still working for the benefit of our country right now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. If even when you factor in the debt that people take, the standard of living and the quality of life are still much higher in the ways that I mentioned before. So even factoring that in, but I want to agree with you, and Paul was talking about this a bit earlier. I want to agree with you that there are specific practices, for example, mortgage practices, lending practices, that are clearly wrong, and that we ought to, if they're not already illegal, we ought to make them illegal. We ought to punish the people who violate those laws. I want to emphasize that that's, so to speak, an in-house disagreement, right? Liberals and conservatives argue about things like that. So I mean, if you've been struck by debt and certain policies connected to debt being unjust, I think you're probably right. A bunch of them are unjust. But that's something that we can resolve within the capitalist framework. That's the kind of thing that Barack Obama argues with Mitt Romney about, right? So you don't need to turn to a communist system in order to get justice about that sort of thing, though I think you're right to bring it up as an issue connected to justice.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess that was mainly directed at me.